Hi, and welcome back to Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always context-driven. I am your host, John Strazicich. Welcome back to another session here in the book of Hebrews, and we're continuing tonight. We'll be finishing up chapter 2 on the Christological Midrash of Psalm 8. Okay, now coming to our text here, first looking here at the bigger picture of where we have been here. Remember that we are in this last part of this Christological Midrash on the Incarnation, and just to show you that from verse 10. What I had here was conclusionary midrashic and reiterated bases for the Incarnation. And what I mean by reiterated bases is that he seems to be going over the Incarnation several different times from different angles, retelling a new aspect that he wishes to reveal about the Incarnation. And we can see that here in point A. So this whole last part of the conclusion of this midrashic interpretation on Psalm 8 on the Incarnation, it breaks down here as we looked at last time, point A and point B. Which was the basis of what God did in Christ through the Incarnation, and that's to be separated from the basis of what Jesus did for us through the Incarnation, i.e. the brotherhood of believers, the spiritual brotherhood of believers, verses 11 to 13. So those broke down because God was the subject of what was going on in verse 10, whereas Christ is the subject of what is going on here in verses 11 to 13. So that helps, I guess, by some way of looking back. And then when we come tonight here to this last section, verses 14 to 18, it's going to break down into three points. And the first one is going to be looking at the Incarnation, and I put here the inferential scriptural basis for the physical Incarnation and its salvific purposes, because the focus seems to be on the physicality of the Incarnation, that Christ partook of blood and flesh for our atonement. And then we have this parenthetical inclusio here that brings the whole topic of Christ's superiority over the angels to a conclusion. So this verse 16 is set off by itself, which then leaves 17 to 18. And I looked at this as the psychological obligations of the Incarnation, basically talking about our human frailty in terms of our volitional abilities, the use of reason, temptation, testing, this part. So he's trying to say that in this aspect of the Incarnation, Christ was made like us in our psychological makeup. So that there's a difference here of how he looks upon the Incarnation from a little different angle, bringing out a little different point. And that's so that Christ can assist us when we're being tempted. Okay, and that seems to bear out here in the purpose clauses that follow. So what's nice here is that there are two purpose clauses in verses 14 to 15 on the first inferential scriptural basis for the physical Incarnation. It comes with two purpose clauses, and likewise down here in verses 17 to 18. the psychological obligations of the incarnation of Christ, also has two purpose clauses. And so they parallel one another structurally as well. And I just wanted to kind of give the big over picture, but this here we're still dealing with here is the Midrash on Psalm 8, and it's and further here the supporting scriptural arguments that were brought forward that we saw last time in verses 12 and 13, supporting the spiritual brotherhood of believers because of our sanctification. So I just kind of wanted to go over a little bit of that as a way of introduction. Okay, so let's just look at this text here. Well, we'll read it first. And I'll just be reading down here. Since therefore the children have shared in blood and flesh, he himself likewise partook of the same, in order that through death he may bring to naught the power of the one who had the power of death, that is the devil, and that he might set at liberty those who, by fear of death, were always living, who were bound in slavery or were subject to slavery. For surely he does not help angels, but he helps the seed of Abraham, or probably better to translate epi lambanomai, for surely he did not take hold of angels, but he takes hold of the seed of Abraham. Therefore, he was obligated in every way to be made like the brethren, in order that he may become a merciful and faithful archieros, high priest, to the concerning the things towards God, in order to make propitiation for the sins of the people, for in that he had suffered, having been tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. Okay, that was a little rough, but that was my my just quick translation here of verses 14 to 18. Okay, so let's look here at the structure of what we're looking at, and this breaks down really nicely into 3 units. Okay, and let's look at these. Let's look here at verse 16. So this functions as a parenthetical inclusio, the statement here in the present tense, for surely he does not take hold of angels, but he takes hold of the seed of Abraham. That's clearly is disjunctive. It's separate from what came here in verses 14 and 15. Verses 14 and 15, I titled here is the inferential scriptural basis for the physical incarnation and its salvific purposes. Now, I wanted to include the word physical because I think to clarify the third point here in 17 to 18, which relates more as a psychological obligation for the incarnation. So I wanted to set this off definitely from verses 14 to 15. And remember, we were talking about the incarnation and that it's being re-referenced or reiterated. The author keeps coming back to the incarnation and gives a different perspective on the incarnation itself. And we saw that occurring in verse 10, and then we saw it occurring in verse 11, through 13. And now we're going to see again another basis for the incarnation in verses 14 to 15. And then our last one is going to be in verses 17 to 18. But there, the incarnation is more in terms of psychological obligations. And we're going to see this because look at verse 17. Therefore, he was obligated according to all things to be made like his brethren, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest. Okay, so this kata panta, this prepositional phrase here, according to all things, is really more focused on the psychological aspect of the incarnation. So that when Christ became like us, verses 14 to 15 is talking more about the incarnation physically, that it was in terms of blood and flesh. Okay, if you go back to Genesis, think in terms of image, and then here in verses 17 and 18, think in terms of likeness, that we're made in the image of God and in the likeness of God, according to Genesis chapter 1. So we're made in his image, that we resemble God. We are honored to be made like God from all creation. When we die and go to heaven, we're not going to be looking at Jabba the glut sitting on a throne. We're going to be looking at God, in whose image we were honored to be made. Now that may it really might not set well with medieval theologians, i.e. Calvinists. I don't really care. I just care about the text. Okay, about how to interpret Genesis on Genesis' own basis. And it's very simple, and I need to spend some time here. It will kind of expand your mind here a little bit in relation to myself. When you go to Genesis, it says that, I think verse 24, chapter 1, that we're made in his image and likeness. But when you go to chapter 5, it talks about Adam having his son Seth, and it says that Seth was made in his image and likeness. So what does that mean? So what does it mean for Seth to be made in the image and likeness of Adam? Well, it means that he looked like him, number one, and number two, it means he acted like him. All right, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. All right, so if that same phrase, image and likeness, okay, in 5:3 of Genesis, means that Seth looked and acted like God, like Adam. Well, what do you think 124 means? Okay, well then God said that, he made us in our image. He surely didn't make us in the image of angels. By reading verse 16, you ought to be able to understand that this whole passage here is that Jesus became, the incarnation was to become made in the image and likeness of man. Okay, so here, when we look here at verses 14 to 15, the emphasis is on the physicality, the physical incarnation of Christ. It wasn't some docetic, some seemingly that he appeared maybe somewhat physically in some type of likeness, like the Docetists thought. But no, we're not of that ilk. Jesus, has two natures, and they weren't blurred. They were, the two natures in one person. Okay, he's fully God and fully man. So Hebrews chapter 2 is talking about the different aspects of Jesus's incarnation. So verses 14 to 15 is going to talk about the incarnation physically, because it talks about that he he partook of blood and flesh. Okay. Haimatos kai sarkos. All right. He partook of blood and flesh. And then here in 17 and 18, when he's talking about the incarnation, it's more. It's this part of the here. It's clarified according to all things. This is talking about. It's a further expansion from just the physicality of Christ's incarnation in terms of blood and flesh. Okay. And this is talking about that Christ became a man and had the ability to die, since he had blood and flesh. Now here, when he talks about, therefore, he was obligated to become like, or to be made in accordance with all things to the brethren. Okay. Or we can add his out to here, but it's not there in the text. And then to understand what he's trying to say in this first clause here, in the purpose clause, is where we're going to be able to understand kata panta here, is that Christ is becoming a merciful and faithful high priest. So that this means that Christ became like us humans, in that he partook of human frailties and just, the weaknesses of our human bodies and our psychological peculiarities that we have as being human, versus Christ, who was divine, originally, before the incarnation. So Christ had to become not only made in our image. Okay, he had to be made in our likeness as well. So I think as you really meditate, if you've been working in this passage, you will see that what I'm saying here is really, it will grab hold of you, and you will see the logic of this, because he in 17 and 18 he's reiterating another aspect of the incarnation. So we need to look at, well, what is this? Well, it's fleshed out here in the purpose clauses. All right. So that Christ himself could have been tempted and tested. Remember, he was thrust out into the wilderness in order to be tempted by the devil. So like us as humans, we're tested, and the word tested or tempted is all the same word. It's peirazo. Okay. Here, it's used here in a passive participle here, adverbial here, and then likewise here again, peirazo men noise. So we'll get to this in verse 18, but I want to look at the structure. So the structure's pretty much set. We've got 3 points. Okay, verses 14 and 15 are a group. Okay, and it has 2 purpose clauses. All right, and which will be here in verses 14b to 15. And likewise, when we get down here to the psychological obligations for the incarnation, it likewise has 2 purpose clauses. So these the first unit and the third unit have a lot of parallels. They're both talking about the incarnation, and then give 2 purpose clauses for that aspect of the incarnation, whether it be the physicalness of it, or the psychological of the incarnation, as we'll see here in verses 17 to 18. And verse 16 is pretty much set off by itself. You can really see this when we read it here in Greek with the present tenses. being set off from, like, let's say the perfect tense here, or an aorist, or tenses later in the passage. But so 16 it functions like a parenthetical inclusio. It's a contrasting remark on angels and Abraham's seed. Definitely stands by itself, and clearly we have three different points to this 2 verses 14 to 18. So that was a little bit of a by means of introduction. We need to talk about text and concept and structural analysis. And so concepts here is that we need to look at the text, meditate on the text, and as you meditate, you will begin to understand conceptually the text, and the structure follows. So you just follow the text, and you break down each part into its conceptual units, and then you begin to itemize. And when you, the more you meditate, you'll be able to see how this functions here. It's really nice. Okay, so now we're going to come to this slide here. Is going to go over some diagramming, and we'll walk you through a little bit of this to show you what's going on grammatically, syntactically. So what we have here is we have it's a periodic sentence. And it, first of all, it consists of a baseline, okay, and this is our baseline here. We have un here on standards, the inferential therefore, which kind of stands outside of the sentence, but it begins it, and so we have here the subject autos. And he partook of the same. Okay, when we have this use of the identical adjective here for autos here, it's a function of another function of autos, and it's an identical identical adjective here. So he partook of the same. All right. So this is metexken here. Metexken here is going to be our base verb, our main verb, and then we're going to have a subordinate clause, epi, introduced by epi, which this becomes a subordinate clause. Since the children shared in blood and flesh, okay, and then is being further modified by a hina clause, and so we had to drop this down because of room, and this shows the purposes of the incarnation here, and so it's bifurcated here, that he may nullify argeo, and then this apolasso here, and these are both in subjunctive. So what we are going to do here, in order that he may nullify the one who has the power of death, tut estin ton diabolon, that is the devil. So what we have here is we have this prepositional phrase here, ton ekanta here, and then it's further clarified here. It's somewhat of a fixed phrase here, tutistin. And it's basically just for clarification so that we know who he's talking about. Who is this one who has the power of death? And so he says that is the devil. And he doesn't clarify how he got this power, but it's common knowledge. Okay, it's supposed to be common knowledge, and we'll when we get to that part of the text, we'll get to it. And then we have by means of death, dia tu thanatu. So this here is modifying. This is a modifying clause. It's a prepositional phrase, and then the second. Remember, the purpose clauses are bifurcated, and that he may set at liberty those, or he may free those. Okay, and then this is going to then fall down into a relative clause, hosoi, as many as were bound in slavery by fear of death, always living. And I think that the way we would probably end up translating this is as many as who by fear of death were always living, who were bound in slavery. That would be a decent way. Enekoi here is the predicate adjective, and then it's modified by douleos, slavery. So typically, enekoi here is in the Gospels, it's translated as guilty or liable, but it means it's from en, it's from the preposition en, and then the verb echo. So it's like caught in, those caught up in slavery, as many as were caught up in slavery by fear of death, always living. And so this is this big, long, periodic sentence, and it has these subordinate modifying clauses, and, it's causal clause here with epi, purpose clause here. It's bifurcated into two purposes. And then this relative clause then further explains when he released these, it's a description of the condition that they were in, and so this is I could go deeper into this, but the basics of diagramming are here. Okay, we'll move on. Okay, moving along here, we're going to come to Franz Delitzsch here, concerning this, concerning verse 14. Therefore, since the children have shared in blood and flesh, I'm telling you guys, when you're reading this, you always just want to say in English, flesh and blood, because that's the way we want to say it in English. But the text here has imatos here first. I don't want to do that. I want to do this one. Okay. Has imatos, so that's in the first position. So it's just it's odd for us English speakers. Okay. Therefore, since the children have shared in blood and flesh, he himself likewise partook of the same. So this is so what I have here is this is the spiritual union demands a physical union. Okay, so when we have this statement here, epe un, this is an inferential conjunction, and together with epe, this phrase here, it has a causal function. And what it does is that it draws conclusions from the previous material, the previous unit, specifically verses 12 and 13, or 11 to 13. Okay, so this inferential basis clause is going to draw real heavy off of basically we're just going to go from 10 to 13, but really it's 11 to 13 that he's drawing heavily upon, and we can see that here by the phraseology ta paideia, okay, the children. Specifically, that's drawn directly from the last quotation out of Isaiah 8. Okay, so there, here I am in the children. Okay, so he's, the text of Isaiah is being quoted, but is being, instead of Isaiah speaking, now it's Jesus is the one speaking in the place of Isaiah. And I and the children, this goes back to verse 11, that the one who sanctifies and those being sanctified are all of one. They're all of one essence, or one DNA, or one stock, or of one family, or of one father, so to speak. Okay, all of those are to be taken. It's definitely familial. So father works good, stock works good. They're all of one, and so it's a spiritual DNA. We all have the same spiritual DNA, which is that we all share in holiness. And you can go to 2 Corinthians 5 for that. We become the righteousness of God through by means of Christ. Okay. So here, let's look here. So let's look at the structure here. So we have the spiritual union demands a physical union. That's really good. This gets to the heart of what verse 14 here is going to be picking up on. So it's therefore. So it's based upon the prior scripture, especially when we take into account ta paideia, okay, the children. Since therefore the children. So it's talking about now the children's nature, that they share in blood and flesh. So in the incarnation, Christ has to identify with us. He himself likewise partook of the same. So he partook of blood and flesh. So this is why here we're putting emphasis on the physicality of the incarnation. And that will be offset again. I'm going to mention this again from verses 17 to 18. It's just really about the incarnation is zeroing in on more of the psychological aspect of the incarnation. And I like to say, which most of you probably will not like this, but it's the image and likeness, that we're made in the image and likeness of God. Not to say that okay, God doesn't have flesh and blood. God is a spirit, okay? But God as a spirit has a form and shape to him. Just like you and I, when we get our glorified body, we're going to have a form and shape to it. And we're going, when you get your glorified body, yeah, you get your hair back, but you're still going to look like you. Okay, you're not going to all of a sudden become Arnold Schwarzenegger, okay? You're not, don't think that you're going to become looking like Arnold, okay? You're going to become looking like yourself, but just with the glorified body. Now, Arnold, if he's got the sense to get to heaven, and he very well could be, I'm sure he fears God, but he has to submit himself, like we all do, in humility, in asking Christ to forgive us of our sins and look to Christ as our Savior. So God, in his spiritual nature, has a form and shape. Just like, remember, when God told Moses, you can't see my face and live. So when he saw the back part of God, he didn't see Jabba the Hutt, Jabba the Glut. He didn't see some donkey. He saw something that appeared as a human shape, because we're made in the image and likeness of God. You guys just get over it. It's every time we see God on a throne, whether it be, Ezekiel, Ezekiel chapter 1, you have God sitting on a throne, and he's in the image of the likeness of a man. Okay, but it's God in his glorious spiritual form that he has. So we're just encased physiologically in blood and flesh, and we resemble that shape and that image that God bears spiritually. Okay, so that just like, go back to Genesis chapter 5, Adam had a son in his likeness and in his image, means that Seth looked like him, walked like him, talked like him. So you go back to Genesis 1 where the same words are used. So he made man in his image and in his likeness. So we're made in God's image and in God's likeness, not in the likeness and image of angels. Okay, that has nothing. They weren't a part of creation. Only God is the creator, and we're honored to be made in the image and likeness of God. So I can look, when I look back at that, I can see, okay, all right, those words work here. But to make it clarified, I want to use the term physical. It's the inferential scriptural basis for the incarnation, and this is really a midrashic scriptural basis. I maybe should have put in there midrashic, the inferential midrashic scriptural basis, because this is really a midrash on Psalm 8 and also Isaiah and Psalm 22. Not so much Psalm 22, but definitely Isaiah and Psalm 8. So that's important to make note of here. And so we have a protasis and an apodosis. So we have a subordinate clause and a main clause. And so our subordinate clause here is, therefore, since the children share in blood and flesh, then now we have the main clause here. He himself, likewise, this adverb here, paraplesios. So he himself likewise partook of the same. This is this identical adjective here from autos. Okay, so that's to explain some grammatical garbage there. Let's get to the real point here of why I made this slide. Let's get to Delitzsch. Okay, the children here are those of the previous quotation. Very important. Okay, the children here, ta paidia, from the previous quotation, and are so called as given by God to Christ. Okay, remember before where we were talking about Maher Shalal Hashbaz and what was it? Yashuv. A remnant shall return. Okay. Sha'ar, that was it. It was Sha'ar. Okay. Sha'ar Yashuv. Okay. Yashuv. I don't have enough room here. Oh well. Don't have enough room to write. But the two children he was speaking there of, Sha'ar Yashuv and Maher Shalal Hashbaz. So now that was Isaiah and him and his children. Now in the quotation it's Christ and his children, which is which are the he's contextually he's speaking here to the Jewish community here, the Messianic community here of the book of Hebrews. So the children here are going to now be those being addressed here in the book, as well as the other Jews. Now remember, this is it's not, I know we're appropriating this to us as Gentiles, but remember this book was originally written to Hebrews, Hebrew Christians. messianic followers of the Jewish Messiah Jesus. So that's who the book was addressed to, and so it speaks in their terms, the seed of Abraham, and so we become the seed of Abraham. We'll talk about that when we come to it, but I just want you to sense here that that you need to remember that this wasn't written to us, okay? It's written for us, but it was written to Jewish Christians in the first century. So the children here are those of the previous quotation and are so called as given by God to Christ, not in respect to their human nature and birth from women, but to their heavenly life and birth from God. That is, they are spiritual children, drawing their origin from one and the same divine source with him. From this thought, the author infers that in order to become the Savior, it was necessary for Jesus to be united with them, not only in the spiritual fellowship of a life from God, but also in the natural fellowship of the same bodily life, and I added here in italics, as in flesh and blood, or blood and flesh. Okay, so here Delitzsch is pointing out here, he observed that he's really picking up on the spiritual nature, okay, and that this when we come here to epiun, or epeun here, this inferential here, in conjunction with epi, has a causal function. And remember, it's to draw conclusions from previous material to advance the argument further. So the further statement here is the physicality of the incarnation. This was talking about the spiritual unity that Christ created back in verses 11 to 13. That was the spiritual unity. Now he's coming and he's doubling down, and he's giving a reinterpretation here of a past explanation for the incarnation, but now he's focusing on the aspect that it's corporeal, it's blood and flesh, or flesh and blood, okay, and that Christ qualifies in that he partook exactly of the same. So Delitzsch picks up here on the reason here for this epeun, very, very, since therefore, this is what I'm saying, since therefore the children partook of blood and flesh, he himself likewise partook of the same. So that's the emphasis here is on the it's on the physical incarnation. So here I have the spiritual union demands a physical union. Boom, that really sets it off. It underlines and really brings out the implications of the text. So it's important, you guys, structural analysis, it's text and concept. You have to read the text, regurgitate it, and you have to understand the conceptual nature of the text. What are the concepts that are emerging from the text? And you make your structural analysis based upon the conceptual nature of the text, of the information being communicated, and it's done very intelligibly. And so, boom, here we go. We have Delitzsch hitting it, right on the head. Okay. So here, coming here to, we had this first statement here about he wanted to underscore the physicality of the incarnation. Now, when we have that, the next point is the salvific means and purposes of Christ's shared human identity. And that's talking about the incarnation, okay? That's what this is referring to. Okay. The incarnation. So Christ shared human identity. I just wanted to bring out the incarnation. So Christ's death is the means of victory. So when we come here to the second half here of verse 14, in order that he may make illegitimate, how are we going to interpret this? Katargeo. Argeo here. Okay, let's look at this. We'll look at this term, kata, and then argeo. So argeo means to be idle, and then kata is a preposition, and they have tons of these prepositions. They make a compound verb, and so they'll use all the prepositions and includicize them, prefix them right onto the verb. So whatever this means to be idle, but kata means it means to it's down. Kata would essentially means down. So he's going to be making something forcibly. It's to invalidate or to render powerless something that's idle. So if this means idle, kata, it's strengthening, intensifying what it means to be idle. So it renders powerless or to invalidate. So in order that he might invalidate the one who has the power of death through death, in order that through death, okay, so this is here, this prepositional phrase means, okay, the means by which he invalidates the one who has the power of death, and then he clarifies this through this clause here, this appositional type clause with this demonstrative tut or hutas here in the accusative case. So it's just a clarifying case just to make sure that we understand who it is, who is this one who has the power of death, and he says it's the devil. So this is the purpose. So this is the very first purpose, and we'll say it's negative, and then the other one is positive. The next one here is to set at liberty those. So talking about the children, us. So here, apolasso here in the subjunctive here case, here is the second purpose statement. So there's two purpose statements. One's negative and one's positive. So the negative one is to invalidate the devil's power of death. The means by which he did it is through Christ's own death. So it's Christ died as a substitutionary sacrifice on our behalf. And that's so it's remember, some of this stuff here, when the Bible makes statements, it doesn't clarify and explain everything. It's just intuitive. It's presuppositional knowledge that is being brought to the table, because obviously there's been some type of relationship here between this author and this congregation, this Jewish congregation. That was a Pauline congregation, because obviously they all knew Timothy. So it makes sense here that there's a lot of underlying presuppositions underneath the text, behind the text. There's history, okay, so that we would understand intuitively that the means of Christ's victory over the devil was by the means of his sacrificial death. Okay, so that's a whole lesson in and of itself, presuppositions, lined underneath the text, behind the text, that actually control the meaning of the text. Oh my gosh, one of my old professors, Rolf Knierim, we have to put in P here. Oh yeah, he loved the priestly nature. He was big on P. No, I don't subscribe to P, but he Rolf P. Knierim. But he was an excellent exegete. Oh my gosh, this guy was. He was. But he was another one of these soldiers under Hitler. He served in Hitler's army. And what it was his dissertation, Die Hauptbegriff der Sünde in Altem Testament. So it was the leading idea of sin in the Old Testament. So he got that straight, and his successor is Marvin Sweeney, is a Jewish scholar, excellent Jewish scholar. Marvin is, he's great. But remember, I mean, they're somewhat, they're liberal, of course. But if you ever met Marvin, he's a wonderful, wonderful man. I had lunch with him one day. He's a great scholar. And Rolf handed off his position to him just so that, he wouldn't look like he was anti-Semitic. So anyhow, that's a little bit off topic, but if we are talking about presuppositions beneath the text, behind the text, Rolf Knierim comes to mind. So he was big on that. Text and concept. That's where I learned all of this stuff from Rolf himself. I had a lot of classes with him at Claremont. Okay. Now we'll go on here to the second purpose clause here, and that he may set at liberty those, who by fear of death were always living, who were subject to slavery, who were bound in slavery. That's how we are going to interpret this particular clause here. And so we have a inakos here, an adjective functioning as the nominative. So it's it's complementary here. It's the nominative complement as the subject here being parallel with the subject back here to hasoi. Okay. So what is this statement here talking about? Is that in the past lives of the children, and that makes, and whether we're Jew or Greek, all of us here qualify here, is that all of us lived our lives by fear of death throughout our lives, and we were held in slavery. So he who commits sin is a slave to sin. And we all, we can suppress the fear of death, but it comes out in other ways. But people live in suppression. They're great. We all suppress the truth and unrighteousness. Go back to Romans, like 1:18, 19. That great passage there in Romans talks about those who suppress the knowledge of God by means of creation. So we also suppress other things in life, and that would be the fear of death and future judgment and God. People never want to talk about God. Just do this: go up to people, start talking about Jesus, and you will clear the room. People will just scatter from you. Because once you start talking about God, you're bringing a flashlight into the darkness of the conversation, because that conversation has no light in it. Once you bring the light of God, boy, the rats scatter, the mice scatter. Okay, they run and hide. Okay, so the truth of the fear of death is that they scatter. I mean, why would they leave? The only reason why they leave and scatter is because they feel uncomfortable about you talking about something that makes them feel guilty. Okay, so you're just reminding them of their fear. Okay, that they don't want to address. They want to drown this out. Okay, but it's there, and it's throughout life. Okay, the Bible is true. Okay, and that we were all bound in slavery, in the slave of sin. And so what Christ did, by means of the Incarnation, he destroyed, not the devil. The devil's not destroyed yet. Okay, in fact, the devil's never going to be destroyed. He's just going to be put into hell one day. Okay, where he's contained and punished. But the devil's always going to live going forward. But what Christ's death did, it invalidated Satan's power of death over the children. Now, he still has the power of death for those who are not brought into spiritual and physical union with Christ by means of accepting his sacrifice. All right, I should just say in spiritual union with Christ. Okay, I was confusing the Incarnation there, but here, the power of death is broken for us. I mean, we're still going to die physically, and remember, the last enemy is death. So Christ's death ultimately is going to nullify death, but Christ has set apart the way in which the program is going to go forward. That when we die here, it's going to be a physical death, but our spiritual nature is now we will be in heaven with Christ at one's death. At this point in the process of salvation, what happens when a person now dies? It's just there's something we would call soma sleep. All right, it's not soul sleep. It's soma sleep. It's body sleep. Your body sleeps in the ground. You'll see the idiomatic expression in Greek that those who are asleep, and it's talking about those who died. Okay, what it's talking about, their body is asleep. Okay, it's not soul sleep. Okay, when you die, your soul and your spirit goes to heaven if you're a Christian. Okay, so you're alive. All right, so but your body is asleep in the grave. So at the resurrection, what awakens? It's your body. It's your soma. So your body's just in soma sleep. Okay, and so at death, we are no longer being in the, I would say, air-conditioned part of Sheol. That no longer happens in hell. I mean, remember, before Christ, Abraham's bosom, there was two compartments to Sheol with a big chasm in between. And on one part was Abraham's bosom, where Lazarus went to, okay, and on the other side, where the rich man and all the evil people at death went to the part of hell that's not air-conditioned, that was in flames, okay. But now, when Christ died, he went to hell. He took Abraham's bosom, all those people who were held captive by death, and he led them all to heaven. Okay, and he proclaimed his victory over death in hell to the principalities and powers. You got to go to Colossians 2 for that. It's awesome. Colossians 2, it talks about how he disarmed them. And this is what happens here. He's disarming the power of death. So for us as Christians, the devil no longer wields the power of death over us, and we're talking about death and hell. Okay, when we die, we go to heaven. Okay, our spirit is in heaven, and Christ will bring us back with him at the second coming, and there'll be a resurrection and a rapture, and then we'll rule and reign with Christ here on this earth for 1,000 years. Very post-tribulational. Quick lesson on that. Revelation 20, Matthew 24, and 1 Thessalonians 4. So 1 Thessalonians 4 has a Christ coming in the clouds. There's a general resurrection. There's a rapture, and it's called the second coming. Okay, look at 4:15 in 1 Thessalonians. It's called the parousia. Okay, you go to Matthew, and you got all four. You got the coming of the Lord. Okay, it's mentioned there in verse 3, and I think like 40 something again. You have Christ coming on a cloud. You have a general resurrection, and there's a rapture. There's two women at the meal, and one taking one left. There's two in the field, one taking one left. Boom, there you go. And then you got Revelation 20, and it's pretty much all done from there. Okay, the first resurrection. So if it's the first resurrection, then if you think you're a part of a pre-trib rapture, well then Revelation 20 says it's the first resurrection. There hasn't been a resurrection before that. So what you're doing is you're twisting things. So get rid of this pre-trib rapture garbage. It's all a bunch of just poppycock. It's American cotton candy theology. That's all it is. So get rid of it. Good riddance to that stuff. Okay. So what Christ does for us in that we're released. He released these. He set at liberty these. And this all refers. You got to remember, this is all done presuppositionally. Well, who does he set free? Well, only those who repent and receive Jesus. Well, it never said that anywhere. Well, it's all presuppositional. It's all underneath and behind the text. Okay, it's all the history. Okay, so all of this comes to bear in how we interpret these things. You're putting together a whole presupposition of knowledge that's already there. So this isn't these people. He's not writing a tabula rasa. Okay, this his speech to them is filled with past information. Okay, so just remember that. Remember, presuppositions are huge for the interpretation of a text. Okay. So we were all bound in slavery, always living in fear of death. That just means that we knew we were guilty. See, and nakos here in other places is interpreted guilty or liable. They're guilty of slavery or liable. But it's really comes from echo and en. So they're caught up in, they're held in bondage. So we were held in bondage. In slavery, okay, that is to sin, and that's why we were always living in the fear of death. Why? Because we knew that ultimately we're going to have to pay the piper, and all these evil things we've done in our lives we're going to have to give an account one day for, because we didn't create the world. And what are we doing here? What's this all about? Who made this place? Who made the sunset? Who made the stars, the moon, the sun, the seasons? I mean, all of this, you have to, we're not dumb. Everybody intuitively knows there's a creator. And if there's a creator who made all this stuff, people ought to be running to get to know him. But the problem is that everybody loves their sin and they're hiding. But those who are looking for truth, who've repented of their sin, come to Christ, and they begin now to live life according to the rules. Okay, so the rules are: Christ died for you, accept his sacrifice, believe in him, that's your work. Okay, the work is, what work do you do to inherit eternal life? Believe in Christ whom he sent. This is Johannine theology. So we're trusting not in our own righteousness. We are trusting in the righteousness that Christ purchased by means of his death, and by doing so we get his righteousness. The righteousness of God is imputed to us because we recognized and humbled ourselves that we were sinners and that Christ had to die because of our sin. So that's all the presupposition that lies behind all this wording that will never ever get explained here. It's all past history. It's presuppositional information in, behind, and underneath the text. What? It's an awesome observation Kinnear made. Okay, verse 16. No, I don't want to go to verse 16 just yet. We'll come to it again. We need to come here to some other statements. Okay, so let's look at what Hughes did. He's a really good commentator here. He does a good job in the book of Hebrews. This verse is both a recapitulation, okay, and development from what has gone before. So remember this whole thing is the incarnation is being recapitulated, redeveloped, reimagined, reiterated. Okay, it's a further unpeeling of the onion to get to different aspect and reason for the incarnation. The conjunction, therefore, un, makes it clear that there's a logical link with the preceding argument. The noun children, okay, ta paidia, is resumed from the text just quoted from Isaiah. The necessity and purpose of the incarnation are now defined with more preciseness than hitherto. Very good. Well, let's look at that. The incarnation, okay, the necessity and purpose of the incarnation are now defined with more preciseness than hitherto. Very good. Okay, its intention has already been declared, so that by the grace of God, Christ might taste death for everyone. Verse 9. And its effect, bringing many sons to glory. Verse 10. And those sons being the brethren whom he sanctified. Verse 11. Verses 12 and 13 adduce scriptural support for the reality of the human brotherhood which unites Redeemer with the redeemed. The genuineness of Christ's humanity is now affirmed in the most unequivocal terms. Okay, it's totally incontrovertible. Okay, it stated that he partook of flesh and blood. Remember, it's imatos kai sarkos, so it's really reversed. It's blood and flesh. Okay, a common synonym for human nature, in which the children share, in that they are all human beings, is the same nature of which he himself likewise partook. The doctrine of the incarnation here is so explicitly stated, indeed purposely overstated, so to speak, since likewise, which means in identical fashion, and the same, which repeats the emphasis, together give a forceful double insistence that no possible place is left for the unreal phantom Christ of the docetic heresy by which the church of the first century was threatened. And you can see this really in 1 John 4, 1-3. It says that he who does not confess that Jesus came in the flesh is none of his. So it's very important. This is Johannine theology here. It's real important. We can see how the Gnostic docetic enterprise was already at work here, and that's this is why he's going over, Hebrews goes over the incarnation in different restatements, and doesn't want to. He wants to make sure he dots all the I's and crosses the T's. Everything's being is being cinched up here. So there's no room for Gnostic heresies that will threaten the church. Okay, we'll come here to Julius Kogel, and in his book here, Der Sohn und die Sonde eine exegetische Studie zur Hebräer 2:5-18. So in his particular book, I can translate Übersetzung German, but I'm not really a good speaker of it. Ich habe vor 2 Jahre Deutschklasse genommen. So I'm just I can translate some of this stuff. But this is what he says here on pages 79 to 80. I actually, I went through this here, and this is what he said. How different is the actual situation in relation to the destiny of man described above in connection with Psalm 8. All right. When you read Psalm 8, it's all beautiful. He was crowned with glory and honor, although he was made a little lower than the angels, and he was made to rule over, all the works of God, okay, over the sheep and the cattle and the birds and whatever, okay, like the mandate is given there in Genesis, like 126 following. So here, let's look at this. So he's looking at what Julius is looking at here. He's looking at how Psalm 8 was originally rendered. Okay, when you read it in the Hebrew text of the Old Testament. Okay, and then when you come to Hebrews, and then you look how man is now, there's such a contrast, and this is all a part of the interpretation of this text, and he does an excellent job. And you're going to see some other scholars are going to reiterate here what Kogel has said here. So let's look at this again. How different is the actual situation in relation to the destiny of man described above in connection with Psalm 8? He who was to raise his head freely, who, as it was said there, he is chosen for honor and glory, for which he wins a crown. But he goes his way as a slave, held in bondage, bowed by fear. So he's reading here verse 15 of Hebrews 2. Okay, so what became of man? Man was, God originally created us all, that it was all great, it was good, and we were made to rule over everything. But remember, the interpretation back in verse 8 was that we don't see anything being subjected to man. Man has failed in his mandate. Well, why was that? Why did man fail? Well, because he fell. Okay, there's something called chapter 3 of Genesis that talks about the fall of mankind. So, but he goes his way as a slave, held in bondage, bound by fear. The description is evidently aimed at bringing out the contrast as sharply as possible, namely the contrast between what should be and what is. There, he is envisions. I'm slurring my vowels here. Envisaged. Oh gosh, I'm just going to give up. I'll say here, he was there. He was envisioned as being crowned with glory and honor. Doxe kai time estephan nomenos. Okay, being crowned. But here he's bound in slavery, and in exos douleos here. So what he's bringing out here is that there is a very sharp contrast to what man was made to be like. He who raised his head freely, and as it was said, that he was chosen for honor and glory, by which he wins a crown, or we were going to say wears a crown. but now he goes his way as a slave, held in bondage, bound by fear. So verse 15, the description is evidently aimed at bringing out the contrast sharply as possible, namely the contrast between what should be and what is. Okay, so then he goes on to explain that Christ came as a man in the Incarnation and won back that Christ was going to set everything right again, and that everything now was going to be put underneath his feet, and that's being accomplished now by Christ's means of his death and his exaltation, and he's waiting till God puts everything underneath his feet, and that will take place at the second coming ultimately. And in the meantime, we are to be about the business of winning souls to the kingdom. And so this is a very, very important contrast that Kugel made out here in his book here, The Son and the Sons. Okay, so this is being taken here from Hebrews 2. That's the title, The Son and the Sons. An exegetical study in Hebrews 2, 5 to 18. Very good. So it would be worth your time looking at that book. Somewhat of a regurgitation of that by Alan Mitchell. And he says, it is somewhat peculiar for the author to engage in a Midrash on Psalm 8 to explain why this is the case. The psalm was originally meant to celebrate the dignity of humans in the created order by highlighting God's effective achievement. The placement of the psalm in this section of the sermon is, however, not completely unintelligible. The Midrash on Psalm 8 allows the author to make a significant point about the role Jesus played in bringing the understanding of the psalm to a new level. In effect, this amounts to a kind of re-scripturing of the psalm. The author wants to show how the dignity of humans was elevated by what God did through the human agency of the Son, and what the eschatological effect of the Son's role is. By applying the psalm verse to Jesus, the author explains how he completes the divine plan for humans as the representative human. Okay, that Jesus becomes this representative human. The psalm enables the author to stress how, at the time of creation, God elevated the dignity of humans. Its inclusion at this point in the argument functions in two ways. First, it serves not only to point out that despite humans' subordination to angels, they had received glory and honor and were given a cooperative role with God in creation. Creation was subjected to them, Genesis 1:26, as verse 6 says of the psalm. In this way, the humans entered into relationship with God, who had placed them at the head of creation. After the fall, however, that relationship was broken and stood in need of repair, Genesis 3:24. Okay, it was never really realized, okay, and remained incomplete. Second, it also shows that the one to whom the future world would be subjected had a real share in humanity, but his elevation to glory was based on the way he embraced the human condition to the point of suffering and death. As a result, everything that had been subjected to humans in creation was now subjected to him in a new way, which is proleptic, since it awaits further eschatological fulfillment. This sense is made clear when the author says that although the readers can see Jesus, they are unable to see everything subjected to him. Okay, that's at this point. But at the second coming, everything is going to be fully subjected to him. So he makes a very, very good case for this Christological Midrash on Psalm 8. And I was really very thankful here to Alan here for Alan Mitchell here for you can see here that he actually in here footnoted back to Julius Kugel for some of his statements here, how he began up here on Psalm 8. But he and Kogel went on to explain the same thing here. I just didn't quote all that. I wanted to break it down in a couple different authors. But anyhow, so Alan does this for us, and he does it in an exceptional manner. And he brings out here that salvation is still eschatological. It's still out in front of us. We haven't fully realized. I mean, if you think you're totally saved right now, you're don't add any highlights. Don't get any Botox. Okay, I mean, don't die. Okay, remember, salvation is complete at the second coming, because that's when we're going to get our glorified body, and salvation is complete, man. Okay, you get your hair back, man. All right, so you get rid of all your wrinkles. So it's cool, dude. We got a lot to be looking forward to, and so he brings this out here. And that, because we don't see everything quite yet subjected to Christ, but it's in the process of. So we need to bring that out. Move along here to a little bit of Lane here. The depiction of Jesus as the champion, the archegos, who crushed the tyrant who possessed the power of death in order to rescue those whom he had enslaved, calls to mind the legendary exploits of Hercules. The oldest tradition that has been preserved of Hercules associates him with the conquest of death. You can find this in Homer's Iliad, in Pindar. This brief account provided the core of the classical legend of Hercules' rescue of Alcestis by wrestling with death, found in Apollodorus' Mythographus Bibliotheca. In Euripides, the dramatization for this incident, I got to put a little R on there. Okay, of death is personified as a warrior, the dark-robed lord of the dead, armed with a sword. So Lane, and rightfully so here. We got to remember this is a Hellenistic crowd here that he's writing to. Remember, they're not reading their Hebrew Bibles; they're reading the Septuagint, the LXX. Okay, so they're Greco-Romans, and so maybe this part of the archegos that William Lanes points out here, that Hercules would be a figure of the first century that would come to mind as a parallel to Christ. We're not diminishing Christ or anything. We're just saying that, oh yeah, we remember the stories of Hercules. Yeah, but what Christ really did it. Hercules is just a legend. Okay, it's just myth. Okay, so anyhow, Lane brings this out here, and this would be part of the colorization, the background, ideas of society that could be read or seen in the background that could add color to all this. I mean, we're not going to put a whole lot of emphasis on this, but it's a part of the cultural baggage that comes along, that's there in the background material. Okay, it's presuppositions that lie behind and underneath the text. It's in culture. Okay, it's in Greco-Roman culture. So he brings this out. Some authors don't like it. You know what? I could see the reality of this. Okay, there. Especially since they're reading a Septuagint text. Okay, so get over it. Okay. I'm sorry I say that, but I guess I like to. So David Allen, he says something really good here, and we come back to some of the good old boys. That's going to be David Allen. He's part of the good old boys, all right? He's an awesome Baptist, okay? So he's a part of the good old boy crowd. And he does an excellent job. And I'm setting you up here. I'm setting you up here to the next slide, okay? So when we come to James Moffat, David Allen mops the floor with Moffat, okay? So I'm setting you up here. Since death came into the world because of Adam and Eve's sin, and since God was the one who decreed physical death as a consequence of sin, in what sense might it be said that Satan holds the power of death? Okay, so that's the question. When you're reading this, these are some of the questions that comes into mind that we need to ask. These are all presuppositions that are behind and underneath the text. Okay, like I've been talking about here. There's certain things that control the text that are presuppositions that lie underneath it and behind it. And what's here is Genesis chapter 3. And we want to go to 2 and 3, okay? That's what's lying behind here, okay? It is because he was the instigator of sin through his temptation of the first couple in the garden, okay? So let's go back to the garden. And Yahweh Elohim commanded the man, saying, from every tree of the garden you shall certainly eat, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat from it, okay? For in the day that you eat from it, mot tamut, you shall certainly die. Okay, so that's the whole presupposition that lies behind this text. Okay, let's go to John 3:8. The one who sins from the beginning is of the devil. Okay, excuse me. I mean, boy, that was horrible. Okay, the one who does sin, or the one who commits sin, is of the devil. Okay, because the devil sinned. Or are we just going to have to historical present? The devil was sinned from the beginning. And to this, or for this purpose, the Son of God was manifested in order that he may loose, or he may destroy the works of the devil. Okay, so this is 1 John 3:8, very important presuppositional knowledge behind the text, along with Genesis here. And we can put in here John 8:44. And you are of the father, the devil. All right, we're going to have to put in here, you are of your father, the devil. We may have to add something to the text there. And the desires of your father you desire to do. That one was a murderer from the beginning. And he does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. And whenever he speaks the lie, he speaks of his own, of himself, because he is a liar and the father of it. Okay, so let's go to Colossians. And you being dead in trespasses and in the uncircumcision of your flesh, he made you alive together with him, having forgiven you all of your transgressions, having wiped away the decrees, the handwritten decrees against us, which were contrary to us, and he took away, all right, the middle wall of partition, having nailed it to the cross, and disrobed the principalities, or the rulers and authorities, and he made an open show publicly, triumphing over them by means of it, that is the cross. I don't think this is meaning God the Father. I think it's by means of the cross. So I know that this is a crux interpretation here. But I'm just going to stick here by means of the cross. So these are presuppositional knowledge text here, that even that Jesus knew that he spoke of the devil as a murderer, and he's the father of lies, and the one who sinned from the beginning, and he came to destroy his works, and that we have here the command of God. So what David or Dr. Allen here is saying is that Satan didn't hold the power of death intrinsically within himself. Okay, he was able to wield the power of death by getting Adam and Eve to sin in the garden, and then he knew that the rest of mankind would fall, the majority of them, and so he did this in spite to God. And so believe me, Satan's going to have a payday, man. He is going to be, oh man, he has all this responsibility that's going to one day come upon this total idiot who destroyed all of us. But Christ redeemed us, and Satan still wields the power of death against those who have not submitted to Christ's rule and reign. So don't think the devil doesn't have power. He absolutely has the power of death. Okay, and but not in terms to us who are walking in Christ. Okay, that we who are walking with Jesus, loving Jesus, we don't have a thing to worry about. We don't have a fear of death. We've been released from that fear of death. Okay, so Satan only got that power by he's the instigator. He's an archegos. He's his own pioneer in sin. Okay, he's the father of it. So he's also an archegos. Satan is, but in a bad sense. Okay, so let's go on to how you were getting. So Moffat here, he's a past interpreter. He said this idea, in order that, okay, of crushing the devil as the wielder of death is not worked out by the writer. Okay, and it's not. Okay, he alludes to it in passing as a belief current in his circle, and it must have had some context in his mind. But what this scheme of thought was, we can only guess. So this is that we can only guess. And he says, evidently, the devil was regarded as having a hold upon men somehow, a claim and control which meant death for them. One clue to the meaning is to be found in the religious ideas popularized by the Wisdom of Solomon, in which it's pretty clear that man was regarded as originally immortal. So he quotes here the Wisdom of Solomon 1:13. God did not make death, and he does not delight in the death of the living, for he created all things that they might exist. And again, God created man for incorruption, okay, and made him in the image of his own eternity, okay. But through the devil's envy, death entered the world, and those who belong to his party experience it. That death did not form part of God's scheme at the beginning, and that the devil was responsible for the introduction of death into the world. Page 34. But what was funny here was that Moffat here, he doesn't really have a clue of where the thought came from. We can only guess. Well, I guess we're going to find it here in the Wisdom of Solomon. But guess what, guy? Where did the Wisdom of Solomon get this idea? And Moffat, it's because, you just need to go back to Genesis 2 to 3, okay? Genesis chapter 2 to 3. And there you'll find the reason why Wisdom of Solomon came up with this idea. And, Moffat, you're clueless, all right? You just didn't want to honor the Bible. You're just looking at Second Temple Judaism. Well, look, folks, it's fine to look at Second Temple Judaism. It's fine to look at Wisdom of Solomon. But you need to know that the Wisdom of Solomon, they were fishing out of Genesis 2 to 3. We all know that. How? It's intuitive, okay? If you're born again, you already know, okay? We just know that this is common knowledge. So, but it's not common, it's not common with him. So I just wanted to set you up because David Allen says, of course, since, death, he attributed it, David Allen attributed everything to Genesis 2 and 3. Okay. It was obvious, right? But Moffat he just couldn't quite get there. All right. So we needed to say that. All right, coming here to Harold Attridge here, looking at verse 16. A terse parenthetical comment encapsulates the reflection on the solidarity of Christ and his brethren. Okay, the remark sounds like a truism, and this impression is reinforced by the introductory, of course, de pou. The verb used to describe Christ's act, epilambonetai, basically means lay hold of, and there is no need to see any other metaphorical sense involved. The term certainly does not mean assume the nature of. Okay, so you can see that in, I think in the King Jimmy is going to have something like that. It's going to have nature in italics, and it was part of the early fathers' interpretation. And there is no need to see any other metaphorical sense involved. The term certainly does not mean assume the nature of, nor does it mean specifically prefer or even help. The picture of Christ, the archegos, taking hold of his followers on the way to glory is in perfect conformity with the imagery of the whole passage. That action is not simply part of Christ's past, but as the present tense suggests, one in which he is yet engaged. So Christ is in the process of taking hold of our hands, okay, on the way to glory. So as we're going, so not only are the angels helping us and assisting us in inheriting salvation, Christ himself is taking hold of our hand, so to make sure that we get there, okay? So believe me, if there's any inkling in you wanting to repent and go to heaven, you're not going to have any problem because Christ is going to be helping us all the way there, okay? So he who began a good thing is going to complete it. That's just the right attitude to have. It's positive, it's meaningful, and this is what is being emphasized here, okay? The present perspective is further highlighted by the designation of the object of Christ's act as the seed of Abraham. Spermatos Abraham. Okay, there's no H here in Greek. So a phrase that encapsulates the specification of the many sons and daughters developed in verses 12 to 13. The many children whom Christ leads to glory are, as elsewhere in early Christianity, the true heirs of the promise to Abraham. So as here in verse 16, okay, the seed of Abraham, Christ came to take hold of them. Okay, now remember that Abraham that it was said to him that all the families of the earth would be blessed through him because he believed God, okay, and obeyed him. All right, so now we become the spiritual seed of Abraham by means of faith, and that's Paul's argument in Romans. Okay, so you can look there for that as background information that we would have to ourselves, since most of us are Gentiles, So we're going to have to pick up the presuppositions that lie behind and underneath the text, and looking at the counsel of God that we're the, we are the children of Abraham by faith. Okay, and that whole argument was worked out by Paul in Romans 3 and 4. So you can go and look at that there. Okay, so let's go on to Schreiner. The word translated help, epilambanetai, doesn't typically have such a meaning. It usually means to take hold, to grasp. Still, the word help makes good sense in context, for Jesus took hold of Abraham's offspring to help them. The author probably draws on Isaiah 41, 8-10 here. So, and he says, "But you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, the offspring of Abraham, my friend, you whom I took, until main here." I needed to get that noon fixed there. "From the ends of the earth, and called from its furthest corners, saying to you, you are my servant, I have chosen you, and not cast you off. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, I am your God. I will strengthen you, I will help you." Eba e thesa, okay, which is, okay, "and I will uphold you by my right hand," my righteous right hand. So he's picking up here that this, epilambanomai is very much related here. It's substituted for until laba main here, so it's related. He's using this here, and obviously the reference here to the offspring of Abraham, or the spermatos Abraham here, Abraham, as is stated here in the Septuagint of Isaiah 41. It seems that he takes hold of the children of Abraham to help them. We see that the verbs take hold of and help are both used here, suggesting that they are closely related conceptually. Interestingly, Hebrews uses the verb take hold of, epilambanomai, in verse 16, and help, ba athesai, in verse 18, along with the seed of Abraham, okay, here, right, that phrase, in verse 18. And thus, it matches the Isaiah citation well, even if the terms aren't exactly the same. Perhaps the author also draws on the New Covenant text in Jeremiah, where the Lord refers to taking Israel by the hand. And that literally is epilambanomai. So you're going to see a lot of scholars referring to Isaiah 41 here as a possible allusion text from which he's drawing. It also could be on, Psalm, I think it's 79 or 89, one of those two, where he's drawing on too. So this is just possible readings here, and Schreiner sees this, and a lot of other scholars. So it's a very, very plausible, solid interpretation. Okay, coming here to Dana Harris, and we're coming here to a switch here. Now we're looking at the psychological obligations of the Incarnation, which allows Christ to be the high priest. Okay, so let's read this. "Therefore, he was obligated, according to all things, to be made like the brethren, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest to the things of God, in order to make propitiation for the sins of the people, for in which he himself has suffered when being tempted, or when he was tempted. Okay, he suffered having been tempted. Now he's able to help those who are being tempted." So we can see here that the focus of the Incarnation here now has a psychological meaning to it, that in terms of our psychological nature of our will and our frailty and our ability to be tempted and tested. Okay, so this is where Christ was also. He was not just made in, like us in terms of flesh and blood, but now he's partaking of the same aspects that we do here on an emotional and factual and relational level, as a community of people, and that we all experience this weakness of human frailty, of our thoughts and our actions, our responsibilities, our shortcomings. So Christ was tested in all of these areas, but came out positive. Okay, and because he was tested in every point as we, but without sin, now he's able to help us when we are being tempted. So we don't have some God that's far off. The Incarnation, you guys, is just awesome. It is the only appropriate means. Remember going back here to Hughes's initial comment back in verse 10, that there was, that the Incarnation by means of suffering is the only true rational means by which God was to redeem us. And so this is all being unpacked. This whole aspect of the appropriateness for the Incarnation is worked out here. So on this other level here in 17 and 18, the psychological obligations for the Incarnation, it's worked out here. And it has two purpose clauses. Okay, the first one is that since he's made in all the ways that he was tempted in every way, and that he suffered by means of these things. The first purpose, now he becomes a high priest, and this is going to become the high priest. This is going to become the major leitmotif for from chapter 3 all the way to 10. It's going to become the leitmotif of the central part of the whole book here. So that Christ may become merciful and faithful. Remember, and this may be the faithful high priest here is an allusion back to 1 Samuel, because remember we had Phineas and Hophnius, the sons of Eli. They were really some bad characters, his son. And remember, the whole ark was captured by the Philistines back then, and so Eli died and all that. Samuel was brought up. He was a faithful high priest. So this, but we added here merciful. So Christ knows how we've been tempted, and he knows everything, and so he's able now to help us because of that. In a real sense, he's walked in our shoes. Okay, he's been around the block. He's not, he just not newly wet behind the ears. Okay, he's not green. Christ lived down here and suffered all this garbage that we went through, but he came out positive. All right, he sinned. He was sinless. So the Incarnation, the second purpose was to make atonement. Okay, so that hilaskomai here means to propitiate, to expiate. It has both meanings. Okay, at the end of all this stuff, it means to make expiation, and that expiation is accepted as propitiated. Okay, so this means to somehow Christ has to be, or God has to be satisfied by means of a sacrifice which will expiate, will cleanse us from our sins, wipe them out, blot them out, become an effectual atonement sacrifice. Okay, so the atonement sacrifice here, the atoning sacrifice, is that Christ, it means both to expiate and to satisfy God's that God was offended. Remember, he told Adam, in the day you partake of the of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you're certainly going to die. So God was not exactly all jumping up and down and jumping for joy because Adam did this. He was pissed off because he knew what was God already knew that he had the whole plan when he created Adam, that Christ was going to be there to redeem him, because he already knew that Adam was going to fail. So the whole plan was made before the world began, and it wasn't something new to God. So when Christ died for our sins, of course, he satisfied God's requirements for the sin of the world, and so that becomes our Christ's sacrifice is redeeming and gets us out of hell. Okay, remember, the blood of bulls and goats got you to the air-conditioned side of Sheol, but the blood of Christ gets you all the way to heaven, right? Why? Because you are sanctified by Christ and you have God's righteousness. So that's why we're not left here in the air-conditioned side of Sheol. No one's that whole compartment's been brought up. Christ went down there and took captivity captive and led them all to glory. Okay, so Abraham's no longer down in hell, with Lazarus. They're up in heaven. Okay, because that's what the blood of Jesus can do. All right, the incarnation is very, very important. So this kind of comes to a conclusion. Hopefully, this, chapter 2 was very important for the incarnation. It is the clearest exposition in Scripture. And hopefully, guys, tonight's thing, if you remember nothing, there's really 3 points, okay? Point number 1 was the physicality of the incarnation, its necessity, and that was to the 2 purpose clauses: destroy the works of the devil, and number 2, to release us from the bondage of slavery and living in the fear of death. Okay, and then there was this second section here about that Christ came to take hold of the hand of the seed of Abraham and not the angels. So that's kind of this parenthetical inclusio that brings this whole section of superiority of Christ over the angels. Christ did not come to help the fallen angels. That's what that means. Remember, the good angels don't need any help. The only help that some of these angels could need would be the ones who fell. And Christ did not come to help them, to grab them by the hand. No, he became incarnated in human flesh to redeem the seed of Abraham. And who's the seed of Abraham? It's all who have faith, have the faith of Abraham. And so you remember the promise to Abraham was that in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. And so we find our blessing as Gentiles through that means there. Go back to Genesis 12. Okay, and then this the final third point here is the psychological obligation of the incarnation. It allows Christ to be our high priest because he can be merciful and faithful to assist us and help us in our trials and temptations and testings. He's been through all of it, so we can come to him and find help from him, okay, directly to God. We don't need to go through an angel or Mary or some other stupid thing. We go directly to prayer in Christ, and he will help us in our time of need. All right. Thank you.